What the hell? Why do I have a cowlick? You guys see that? I have like a crazy ass cowlick over there. Look at that. That's what I get for wearing a dirty ass hat to go get my medicine. Hey everybody, how y'all doing today? I am doing terribly. All right. So let us take a look at today's day of baseball, and then if I have time, I'll do basketball. I'll definitely answer questions along the way. So thank you all for joining me, and I'm not going to waste any time because I did some work on the showdown slate that's coming up at 2:10, and I want to get to that in case y'all want to get in there. So if you look at the lineups that got put out there, the White Sox lineup is absolutely terrible. They are resting Moncada. Garcia is still out. Tilson is a good batter, and he's leading off, and he's very cheap for that price. So I do like him a lot, and he should be good against Carrasco's weakness. But that being said, Manuel Benuelos is a lefty going for the White Sox, and he is absolutely terrible. Cleveland is going to get more than 5 runs here, and I think that the strategy here is going to be try to get 5 Indians, including Carrasco, and then a White Sox to balance it out. I'm not sure exactly how you're going to do it. I see 2 or 3 legitimate options here, given the recent form of everybody. We have Lindor, who is starting to heat up. I really like him as a captain. I think Carrasco, you can't go wrong with him as a captain today against a weaker White Sox lineup than what they normally put out there. And I think that you can't go wrong. Well, you can go wrong. I think that it's a good GPP play to take a Jordan Luplow who's cleaning up. If you look at here, let me go to the stats that I have all prepared here. Luplow over the last 2 weeks has hit .313 with an OPS of .982, which includes an ISO of .375 and a WOBA of .389. You look at all of his stats, and Luplow has been hitting real good, and he is one of those dudes that's going to be a lot better against lefties, which means that this is one of those days that I'm going to be a big fan of taking Luplow against Banuelos especially. So depending on how you want to work it, those are the 3 options to take for captain, I think, on the showdown slate. I also want to point out the other players in this game who have come in with good recent form or in a good matchup. So on the Indians, like I said, I already mentioned Lindor, who has had 32 plate appearances in the last 2 weeks, is hitting .429 with an OPS of 1.009. His ISO is only 143, but that's going to go up. We saw that home run yesterday was a monster, but his WOBA is 409. So Lindor is hot as anything. Like I said, I think he's a great captain. Luplow would be the second hottest. Surprisingly enough, Roberto Perez is going to be the 3rd hottest hitter. He's only had 13 plate appearances. He's hitting .250, but he has an OPS of 808. An ISO of 250, which isn't bad, and a WOBA of 341, which for $5,000 in this against a lefty on top of it, as someone who shows normal splits, that's something I'm going to be a big fan of. One dude I want to mention, min-priced, he's batting 6th in the lineup, just got called up from AAA, is Oscar Mercado. A lot of people are going to overlook him because they don't know who he is, but he is, I don't think he would be classified as like a home run hitter, especially, but he is an extra base hitter. He hits a lot of extra base hits. You can see over the course of this season and last season, he's been very good at that. And one of the really good things is that he gets a lot of stolen bases. He's very efficient in terms of getting stolen bases. And I think that hitting in front of like Bowers and Perez and Leonis Martin is going to be a boon to that. So I think that we have someone who can get on base, get you a single or a double, get you some points there. And then if he does get on with a walk or with a single, he has the chance to get you those 5 stolen base points. At 4,000, that'll help you basically get in whoever you want as captain, Carrasco included. So that would be the Indians, the Indians that are hot. Let's take a quick look at the White Sox. Surprisingly enough, There are only like 2 people playing in this game for the White Sox that I would classify as hot recently. James McCann, over the last couple weeks, has a batting average of .533 with an OPS of 1200. ISO only 133, but the WOBA of 515. So McCann's doing fantastically well. He does not have a good matchup, though. McCann is extreme normal splits, and Carrasco is, or can be if his stuff is working as well as it should, devastating against righties. So McCann is someone in good recent form, but hasn't really been, or isn't really in that great a spot, I should say. And then the only other White Sox that I would say is even close to being in the hot category is Yolmer Sanchez, who's batting 8th. He has hit .250, which is not great. OPS of 896, better. His ISO of 313, pretty damn good. And his WOBA of 373, not bad at all for someone, I believe he was priced 4,200. So only 200 above min price. Batting 8th, switch hitter, so he's not going to be taken out of the lineup at any point. And he is a switch hitter that is not an extreme splits kind of guy, but he is much better as a lefty, which he gets against Carrasco, which is better for him. So if you are looking to get, excuse me, the more expensive Indians bats, if you want to take a chance that this is the day that Carlos Santana is going to wake up because he has been horrible lately, I can absolutely, definitely understand that. You can take Mercado and Yolmer Sanchez, who are both in decent spots, and then you can really fit in basically anyone you want for the rest of the game. Pardon me, something in my throat. So, let me see if there's any questions about Showdown. Otherwise, I'm going to take a sip of my Sprite Zero and then move on to the games. All right. So I know there's a 6 o'clock turbo. I did not put the work in, but it's easy enough having looked at the 2 games briefly. We have the Yankees at the Orioles. That should tell you everything you need to know. Both teams are going to score a lot of runs, though. I think this is one where if you're playing the turbo, it's going to be a lot sneakier to do O's bats. J.A. Happ has looked, except for that one last start, he's looked terrible this season. I've talked a lot about how, 36, 37 coming up. The age is catching up to him, and he's reaching the end of the rope. Like anybody at that age, they're going to have really good days, but it's more of a bet at this point that you hope that he's going to have one of those. It's not one of those things that I would say is necessarily set in stone. So I think that people are going to flock to J.A. Happ because of the matchup, because there's only going to be 4 pitchers that you can pick from. But I think that it's much better to take a Ricard, who has extreme normal splits, going against Happ, who's a lefty. I think it's much better to take like a Dwight Smith Jr. I think Rio Ruiz, if he plays, is a lefty with extreme reverse splits. I don't have him in my projected lineup, so I have to go by the memory, but I'm 99.9% sure of that. So there are several Baltimore bats that are in really good spots today, and I will update that lineup when it comes out. Hopefully it comes out by the end of the video. The Cincinnati lineup did, so I'm expecting the 6 o'clock games to come out shortly, and then I can dig into that a little bit better. But the projected lineup I have is still not going to be too bad, even though they're by far projected to score the least runs. I don't think they're something you could play in cash or something you can count on, but I certainly think they're going to put up some runs against Happ. They're going to get some walks, and a lot of people are not going to be on them at all. And similarly, or the exact oppositely, Andrew Cashner sucks. He is one of the worst pitchers in baseball. If Jose Urias is not the worst number 1 starter in the game, it's Andrew Cashner. On top of that, their pitching staff is absolutely horrible. So if we're talking about the best stack in that 2-game slate, it's obviously far and away the Yankees. No one is even close. I don't care if the wind was blowing out in Wrigley, even more than 3 miles an hour. Yankees far and away against Andrew Cashner and the horrifyingly terrible Orioles bullpen. They give up so many more home runs a game. Like I've talked about in articles before, it's almost Ruffian. The gap between them and the next worst team is like the difference between the second worst team and the 28th worst team. It's absolutely incredible. So load up on Yankees bats. I would say that, Frazier at 4,100 is a great bet. Urshela has been hot and getting big hits, 4,000, not bad at all. Aaron Hicks, I think they're going to lead him off again, even though a lot of people have him batting third. Regardless, 4,700 for Hicks. That dude is a great hitter, and I think that people are rightly suspicious of people coming off the IL. It's generally a good idea to avoid people coming off the IL because it takes a while to get reaccustomed to the speed of Major League pitching. Cashner is a terrible pitcher, but he used to throw 100. He's not there anymore, but Cashner, is still a Major League pitcher, and he has some pitches that move in a Major League way. So it might take some time for Hicks or whoever comes off the IL at any point to catch up. But I think that that's going to lower his ownership for people who play the stack. So it's a good way of attacking Baltimore with someone high up in the order that's underpriced that will relatively go underowned. So let's move on to the next game. That is Cubs and Reds. I am interested in Hendricks here only because it's a 2-game slate. Hendricks doesn't strike anybody out, but he's a very good pitcher. I've talked about him. He's generally in the no thanks tier when I write my articles in that format. He gets the outs, he gets the ground balls, he doesn't strike people out, which means he's a good real life pitcher, but absolute dog shit when it comes to DFS or a commodity for fantasy. He just doesn't get the strikeouts that we need to rack up the points. So that being said, he's far and away the best pitching option on this 2-game slate. So I would definitely roll with him. And then, especially 8,800, that's not bad at all. And then you have Tanner Roark going for the Reds. Roark is one of those dudes that's kind of crafty, has some strikeout upside, but doesn't really get there a lot. He winds up walking a lot of dudes, but he's generally good at keeping the ball on the ground and keeping the ball in the park. So I don't love Roark here, but I think that for the savings, you can take Hendricks and Roark, and that will allow you to take all of those Yankees bats. How you doing, Grace? How's it going today? So I think that if I was to play the turbo slate, my strategy would be Hendricks and Roark as my pitchers, and then I'd go as heavy as I can on the Yankees bats, especially Urshela and Hicks at the top of the order, and then fill the rest in with Baltimore because I think that they're going to go underowned. All right, let's move on to the main slate. So when I was starting to write my article last night after I did all of my research and everything, it struck me that this slate is kind of the opposite of the last few days, and that was bound to happen. I mean, if you have a bunch of slates in a row where there's no or very few really fantastic pitching options, you know that within the next few days there's going to be a glut of a lot of very high-priced or very good pitching options. And I think that today is one of those days when that is catching up to us. So what I want to do here, instead of going game by game, which I do want to touch on when I'm looking at the batters, I think that it's better for us to look at a couple of other things, namely the pricing for tonight, and then the recent form, and then the matchup. So I'm going to look at all of those things, and I'm going to go pitcher by pitcher in terms of who has the lowest FIP, because that's how it's sorted. I will say this, I have a bunch of crap over the screen. I wish you could see it because it would make it a lot easier. to see everything, but I'm going to do my best to tell you everything, not just run numbers at you, but try to paint the picture, as best I can, which is kind of what I'm here for. I'm not here just to run numbers at you that you can look up easily enough. So the first pitcher and the best pitcher lately, you might be surprised over the last couple of weeks, is Brandon Woodruff for the Brewers, who's striking out more than 13 people per nine, which is absolutely fantastic. He's going against a Phillies team that doesn't strike out a ton, but is definitely in the middle of the pack. The Angels lead the major league, striking out 5.9 times per game, and Philadelphia is at 8.77. So while they're not the Nats, who by far strike out the most, well, not by far anymore. Texas is catching up to them with that TTO philosophy. But while they're not the worst, they still get their fair share of strikeouts. Woodruff has also been walking less than 2 per 9. I like to see less than 1, but less than 2 is fine enough for me. Even with that, his BABIP, the amount of hits he gives up on balls in play, is inflated at 400, which has given rise to his WHIP being 109. But that kind of luck factors into the advanced stats. So while Woodruff has had an ERA of 1.64, his FIP is 0.75, which is ace caliber pitching. He's going against a Phillies team that is not in the best form. They're decent. I'm not going to say they're not decent. They got home runs coming, and any one of those bats, any one of the bats in that lineup can hit you a home run, especially in that ballpark. But if you're going by strictly who has been the best recently, even better than Chris Sale, we are looking at Brandon Woodruff, and he is only 8,600. So again, while the matchup does concern me, I think that anytime someone's going against one of the better offenses in the game, it's going to concern me. While the matchup against Rhys Hoskins always concerns me when we have a righty going, Maikel Franco has been cold as anything, and a bunch of the bats on Philadelphia. The only one who's been really doing here. Let me get that up because I had that last night and I was kind of surprised. I thought the Phillies had been doing better as a team, but honestly, the only players that have been I would classify as hot lately are Cesar Hernandez and Odubel Herrera, with Rhys Hoskins really close to that line. But if you look at Segura, Franco, most of this order is not looking too good. So while I don't think Woodruff is going to be a cash play, I think that Woodruff at 8,600, given his recent form, and we can take a look here, 31.1 against Washington, 22.5 against the Mets his last 2 games. He has the strikeout upside, and he's underpriced for it, and he's going to go under-owned given that recent form. So I think that, again, this is one of the important things we need to look at. There is a glut of pitching today. It's going to be incredibly important to figure out who has the best matchups and then try to exploit them. So Woodruff, I think we're starting off with, is absolutely fantastic. Next up is going to be Chris Sale. Chris Sale, before when I said that Woodruff has been better than Sale, but what I mean is by the FIP rankings. I don't mean in real life, because that would be ridiculous. If you look at almost every other stat, Chris Sale is crushing the hell out of him. His strikeouts per 9 are 15 and a half. He's walking 0.64 people per 9 inning, which makes his WHIP 0.5, which is absolutely out of this world. His ERA is 0.64, and his FIP is 0.76, so 0.01 more than Brandon Woodruff. He is at home going against a Rockies team that is much worse on the road. The one caution here, and this is one of those things, what happens when the unstoppable force meets the unmovable object? Arenado and Story are lights out against any lefty, period. Any park, anytime, anywhere. So it would be very interesting to see, personally, while I think that Sale is the best pitcher on the slate, and he has the best chance to break the slate with how high he scores, so to speak, I also think that there's a good chance that he has a very good game with the rest of the lineup and winds up giving up a home run or two to Arenado and Story. So I think that there are other pitchers that we could consider for cheaper who may not have the upside, but who are probably going to be in the same ballpark in terms of scoring. The next pitcher on the list is Chris Paddock, who is 10K, very expensive, but his recent form has also been fantastic. If you have followed the sporting news in terms of the psychology of people, Paddock was really angry that they gave Pete Alonso the Rookie of the Month, and he made it his personal mission to, I guess, win this month and then eventually win Rookie of the Year. So he has come out this month guns blazing. If you look, he's struck out again, 10.5 per 9. I want 9 or more to be interested at the very minimum, especially on a slate like this. So again, give me Chris Paddock. I think that he is an absolutely fantastic play, and he shut down the Mets and the Braves. While the Mets do strike out a lot, the Braves do not, and he's shown the upside. The one thing I will caution, and I think that this matters a lot, is the Dodgers are the best offense in the National League. And it doesn't matter who you are. You could be Max Scherzer, as you saw. They can still get some runs and make it so that your score is not as high as the price indicates it should be. So going into LA, he's not even in the better pitchers park in San Diego. I think that if he was 9,000, I would absolutely take a chance. I would run with him today, but at 10K, with a few cheaper people that I like better and a few more expensive people that I like better, I do love him as an option, but I think that there are better options for you. For example, the next guy I'm going to talk about, fourth best pitcher over the last couple weeks, Charlie Morton for the Rays, who is pitching in Miami against the Marlins, which is the free square. So I would much rather have Morton than Sale. I would almost certainly rather have Morton than Kershaw, definitely rather have him than Paddock. And then when we get into the Syndergaard Smith, under 10K territory, it becomes a different question. But in terms of the 10K and over pitchers, Morton in Miami is as slam dunk as it gets. His K9 over the last couple weeks is over 13. So again, absolutely fantastic. He's been walking a ton of people, though, close to 4 people per 9. His whip is 1.46, and the BABIP that I talked about before is 429. Which is a lot, but that shows that he has been unlucky, and that again is reflected, much like with Woodruff, in the difference between his ERA and his FIP. His ERA is still a fantastic 2.31, but his FIP is 1.48, meaning that he has pitched better. And now going against a Marlins team, I think that the sky's the limit for Morton today. I would not hesitate to list him as the overall top pitcher on the slate. Fitting him in for the price is going to be the question, because again, there are a ton of options that we are going to be able to play today, and there are a ton of options a lot cheaper that'll help us get in some better bets. So right now, it's going to come down to your philosophy in terms of how you choose your pitchers. And while I wanted to spend my video today talking about that, the members video, I'm going to push that to tomorrow. But I think that, again, if you don't think the top pitchers are going to go off, if you don't think that the top pitchers are on a separate tier, then it's fine to take risks and go down. But when you have this many good pitchers, taking that risk is basically rolling a die, rolling 2 die and betting that it's going to be a 2. It might happen. You might get lucky. You could bet double zeros at the roulette wheel, and it might happen, but the odds are not good for you. So I think that today is going to be a day where we need to find the best pitching. And then, we're talking the 8K and over, like I've been talking about recently, which most pitchers are today. If you go and look, most pitchers are 8K and over. And then we're going to have to find some of the cheaper bets, but we'll get into that when the time comes. So again, Morton, fantastic. The next best pitcher, which might be a surprise to some of you, I've been talking about him over his last couple starts, is Luke Weaver. Luke Weaver has looked fantastic lately. In the last article I wrote when he was pitching, I talked about how he had really high potential, and I also mentioned how people have these locked-in memories for what happens in the first couple starts of the year. So if someone like a Luke Weaver, who coming into the year is an unknown type of pitcher where you don't really know if he's going to be great or if he's going to be bad. He hasn't lived up to his potential, so we have to be wary of him. If he comes out and the first couple starts, he looks absolutely terrible, most people think, okay, he's terrible, and then they ignore him. They don't keep up with what happens over the course of the year and the adjustments that someone makes. If they see Luke Weaver had a good start, they write it off and say like, oh, wow, look, he got lucky. He had a good start, instead of looking at whether or not it's part of a trend or if he's changed something. There's a ton of stuff that we need to consider. And Luke Weaver over, the last bit of time has looked absolutely fantastic. 8,800 going against a weaker Pittsburgh team. I absolutely love him today. His last two starts were against a Braves team that I've already mentioned, don't strike out and are fantastic at getting on base. He got 22.2 points without the win. And then his start before that was in Colorado, where he managed 31.4 DKP. Again, over the last couple of weeks, he has a K9 of 9, which again is what I want as a bare minimum. His walks per 9 is under 2. It's 1.9, but still under 2. His whip is 0.64. So even though he's walking more people than I would like, he's not giving up hits. You can see that the BABIP is 188, which should again regress to mean, but that doesn't mean it's going to happen against a worse Pittsburgh team. And his ERA 1.29. His FIP is 1.97. So again, you can see BABIP predicting the difference between ERA and FIP. In this case, we see that someone who's getting luckier with BABIP is going to have a slightly higher FIP than ERA. But still, a 1.97 FIP, getting 9 strikeouts at 8,800 going against a weaker Pirates team, I think is absolutely fantastic. While I don't think it's the best idea, I do like some of the more expensive pitchers, a couple that I haven't talked about yet. I think it's perfectly legitimate if you want to even start your lineup with Luke Weaver and Brandon Woodruff today. I don't think a lot of people are going to do that, and I think that they're both capable easily of getting 30 DKP. So again, I don't think they're as safe as a Morton or as a Syndergaard or as a Caleb, well, not Syndergaard, as a Caleb Smith. But I certainly think that they have tremendous upside today, and I will be looking heavily at them. So the next best person is Jared Eichhoff, who has looked absolutely fantastic lately. He has his K9 is less than I would like. So this is where we have to start separating people for today. Eichhoff is someone that we would normally really like today if it was a shorter slate or if there weren't many good pitching options. But today, Eichhoff is someone who just doesn't get that many strikeouts. His K9, he's only had 31 on the entire season, whereas most of the pitchers I've talked about are 50 plus. His K9 over the last couple of weeks is 7.6. So again, well short. I can see a lot of times if the pitcher's in a fantastic spot and going against a couple of teams that don't strike out a lot, If he's between 8 or 9 or just under 8, you can make exceptions. It's not a stone cold rule. There's obviously leeway because it's self-imposed, and I understand, the differences between different conditions. But Eichhoff has gone against, the Cardinals and the Nats strike out more than anybody in the game. So I don't think that, given that, and given the fact that he's 9,200, more expensive than Weaver and Woodruff, and too close to a Caleb Smith, that Eichhoff is only a GPP play. On top of that, he is going against a really nasty Brewers team. They strike out a lot. I'm not going to say they don't. They're near the bottom or the top, depending on how you look at it. They strike out, the 7th most in the game. So again, the strikeouts are there, pushing his upside up. But there are much better pitchers in similar spots with similar prices against much worse teams than the Brewers, who, if not the Dodgers, are probably the best offense in the National League, maybe the Phillies, but does it really matter if you're splitting hairs at that point? So Eichhoff, good, but the next best pitcher over the last couple weeks is Noah Syndergaard. Syndergaard gets a matchup against the Nationals, who, like I said, strike out more than anybody, and he is a good strikeout pitcher. I don't think that he's going to get the complete game shutout. You're not going to get the 40-plus points from Syndergaard that you got against Cincinnati, but I think that the Nats are a much easier team to strike out than some of the other teams that he's been going against lately. If we look at the numbers, 9 strikeouts per 9, which, less than I want, but given the recent, matchups is understandable. 1.2 walks per 9, which is, a little higher than I want, but still perfectly acceptable. His whip of 1 is fine. His ERA of 2.4 is good, with the FIP of 3.25. We're getting to the over 3 in the FIP, which is, not going to be nearly as good as the people under 3. That's a pretty big demarcation line as far as I'm concerned. But it's still someone in a good matchup that is going to be underrated because of how people perceive the Nationals. And the Nationals are a fine offense, don't get me wrong. A function of them striking out a lot was Soto and Rendon missing. But it's not like you can argue that Soto and Rendon have looked absolutely fantastic recently. If you look at the Nats over the recent week, which is how I sort hot and cold. For pitchers, it's a couple weeks, but for hitters, it's the last 7 days, because that's really the meat and potatoes of hot and cold. The highest WOBA on the Nats is Gerardo Parra with 356, whose OPS is 873. Next is Michael A. Taylor with an OPS of 690. The second best hitter for the Nats over the last week has an OPS of 690, WOBA of 304. That is absolutely terrible. Let's look at, really quickly, because this is important. Let's look at the Nats projected lineup and the OPS or the WOBA that they've had over the last week. Adam Eaton leading off. His OPS 457, awful. WOBA 210, awful. Victor Robles batting second. His OPS 439, WOBA 215, awful. Juan Soto, OPS 452, WOBA 224, awful. Rendon, OPS 436, WOBA 199, awful. Howie Kendrick, OPS 490, WOBA 191, awful. Brian Dozier, OPS 652, WOBA 291, not nearly as bad as everybody else. He's actually the best hitter in the projected lineup so far. Good for him. He's still absolutely terrible. Next up is Yan Gomes batting seventh. Yan Gomes is not okay, there he is. He's at the bottom. That's why. Because his OPS is 083 with a WOBA of 058. That's even worse than awful. And then Defoe, OPS of 511 with a WOBA of 230. So this is a team in bad form going against a dude that throws 99, 101 mile an hour fastball and a 92 mile an hour changeup. They are, if Syndergaard is in form today, he's going to get the win because the Nats have Hellickson going against them. It's not like it's a pitcher on pitcher duel. And on top of that, he has looked good recently, and he's going against a team that strikes out a ton that has looked terrible recently. So I think that Syndergaard is going to be grossly underowned for 9,800. I would absolutely consider playing him here. If I thought that he was going to be super popular, then I would completely change my tune. But I think that he is going to be, for that price range, one of the lowest owned pitchers. I can actually try to confirm that and see where is it? I want to see if ownership projections are out. They not listed? Okay. Give me 1 second, folks. I want to see if the projected ownership is out on the pitchers and see if my suspicions are correct about Thor. Thor is projected for 18% ownership, which is the fourth most. That's actually surprising. At that, I might fade him. If he is going to be the fourth highest owned, then there are people I like better. Again, I think that we have other people with higher upside in that range, and I will definitely get to that later on. I thought he would be in the single digits given the matchup against Washington and given the glut of pitching around him. The Detroit lineup has just been posted. Ooh, that's different. Dixon's batting second. I don't know who they're going against right now, but that is absolutely fantastic. The medicine is starting to make me really, really loopy. I think it's the Astros. Yeah, I'm definitely losing it. Okay, let's keep going then because I don't want to completely lose it. So I think that Thor is a good play. If he is 18% owned and that popular, I can understand the fade because, like I said, Caleb Smith, I think Kershaw is a better pitcher. Morton is certainly a better pitcher. And if someone's going to be super owned anyway, you might as well go with Morton. That's not a terrible thing to do. Okay, next up for the Angels. It says Felix Pena, but normally they start an opener when Felix Pena goes. So, yeah, they have Cam Bedrosian opening and then Felix Pena, who's going to be the potential long reliever. I haven't seen anything on that in writing, but Pena has been in very good form lately. Let me see. I don't see. They don't have the long reliever on DraftKings, so that makes me concerned that it hasn't been. Oh, nope, there it is. 7,500 for Pena. Okay, that's not bad at all, given his recent form. So the one thing that I don't have with the advanced stats that I did forget to look at with the Felix Pena situation, I looked at the other openers, is how many innings he normally pitches. Because if he gets 4 or 5 innings a time, then, yeah, he does. Okay, so yeah, let's look at his last 3 starts. 7 innings, which is fantastic. 32 DKP, 4.1 innings, still good enough for the win because he's coming in second. 15.4 DKP, even though he gave up 3 earned runs, 2 home runs. And then before that against the Yankees, 5 innings pitched, 22.9 DKP without the win. So, you look at the advanced numbers, 9.5 strikeouts over the 9, which is fantastic. 0 walks, a whip of 0.62 with an ERA of 2.38, a FIP of 3.29, and an xFIP of 2.30, which is fantastic. So I think that while it is a much greater risk, I think the Twins are a severely underrated offense. And I think that when you're looking at openers to the long relievers, I don't even know how the hell you want to classify it or what you want to call it. I still kind of call them the starters, even if they're not the openers. But if you're looking at starters like that, when you're throwing bullpen games, they are more prone to being taken out if they show any weakness or if there is a particularly bad matchup, which with against this Twins team, there's going to be. So I think that 7,500 is a fair GPP price for Felix Pena. He is someone who can get you 20 to 30 DKP there. It's just not something you can trust. And I think you need to understand that. Don't be desperate for cheap pitching and put yourself at a disadvantage for someone who realistically could only get you 4 innings when you have a ton of pitchers on the slate with more strikeout upside that can get you 7 or 8 innings pitched without having someone have to come in and pitch before them. So, Pena, good pitcher, GPP option only. Don't count on him. I think it's very important to point that out. I do like him, and if you're doing a bunch of lineups, I absolutely would have my fair share, but it's not someone that I am absolutely going to be locking in. The next play after Pena is my favorite play of the day, and that is Caleb Smith for the Marlins going against the Rays in Miami. So it depends on what you look at, but either the Marlins Stadium or the Mets Stadium are the best pitchers parks in baseball. I would argue the Mets Stadium deflates hitting stats more than anybody else, but given everything else, the way they've moved in the fences and everything, Miami is still right up there, worst if not second worst. So he's in a better park environment, even though Tampa Bay is a good pitcher's park. He gets a Rays team that is going to lose the DH and have to have Charlie Morton pitching. They're going against a Rays team that is weaker against lefties than righties with Austin Meadows back, as you will find out. And you are having someone that is in fantastic form recently, who's been striking out a ton of people and is going to be drastically underowned for that upside. If I can tell you, when I went to look at what Syndergaard's ownership was going to be, that Roto Grinders projects that Smith is going to be significantly under him, 6-7% under him. And meanwhile, let's see, Caleb Smith starts this year. This is every start this year. 20.3 DKP, 17.9 DKP, 27.1 DKP, 28.5 DKP, 25.1 DKP, 30.2 DKP, 28.2 DKP. He's only 9,500, and he's going against a Tampa Bay team that is not going to be as good today in Miami. So Caleb Smith, far and away, favorite pitcher on the slate. I am starting with him. I can understand if you want to pair him with like a Weaver or a Woodruff. If you're going MME and want to go to Pena, I get it. I'm going to try to get either Syndergaard or Morton or Kershaw with him and then see what bats are available. I absolutely, I can't stress that enough. Absolutely in love with Caleb Smith today. Absolutely in love with him. Next up is where we're going to start getting a little worse, but we've already gone through a good chunk of pitchers. Next up, we're looking at Danny Duffy for the Royals. Danny Duffy is someone that a while ago, and by that I mean a couple years before the injury stuff, was an incredibly high strikeout pitcher with incredible upside every time. And I think that I love him today as a GPP play, and that's really hard for me to say. I wouldn't love him against like 28 teams, but as a lefty going against this Texas team, I think that it's absolutely worth taking a chance on him. They increase your strikeout upside. You walk less because they chase more pitches. The TTO philosophy, like he might walk Sin-Chu Chu a couple times, but there's a ton of strikeouts in that lineup, and they are significantly worse against lefties. I've talked about it several times. If you are a decent lefty pitcher with a decent strikeout rate, while it's never a sure thing, the Rangers are a very good offense. I am definitely going to be in your court more so than the Rangers. So I think that while Danny Duffy isn't someone that I'm locking in, if I'm doing one lineup, he's not, someone that I think is a fantastic play. Last game was against Houston in Houston, who is dominant against lefties, and he still got you 6 2/3 with 19 DKP. He got the win there. So again, it's not fantastic. He gave up his runs and his walks and everything, but still 20 on 77 is not, 20 DKP on 7,700 isn't terrible. And he was 7,300 then. And then the game before against Tampa Bay, who again I talked about with lefties just before. He got 6 innings and 19.3 DKP without the win. So against a Texas team that strikes out more than all those and is much worse against lefties than all those, I think Danny Duffy is a sneakier play. Given the recent form, again, just to look, his FIP is 3.59, not great, but also not terrible. If we're looking at, Banuelos, who I talked about before in the showdown slate, his FIP is 8.95. Tyler Beede, who we're going to look at later, his FIP is 10.27 with an 18.69 ERA over the last couple weeks. So, there's a pretty nice demarcation for the people around 3.5 and then like the 4 FIP and over. I would say that under 3, give or take, is like a different class. 3 to 3.5 here is a different class. 3.5 to 4 is another tier, and then 4 and over is like a stay away as best you can. So we're almost at that point, and that's when we're going to start talking about bats. After Danny Duffy is Mike Leake, who is someone I have absolutely no interest in playing, but much like a Hendricks that I talked about, has been really good lately at keeping the ball on the ground. Let's dig into that. No, he's just been going long. He's not striking anybody out. Oh, yeah, no, it is. It's just the last start against the Yankees. Yeah, against Cleveland, it was 13 ground balls to 3 fly balls and 4 strikeouts. And this is, while this is an Oakland team that's got some power, and I wouldn't mind taking a chance on them, Mike Leake, I don't care what price he is, 6,800 or not. I'm definitely not playing him when his strikeouts per 9 is 4.15 over the last couple weeks. There's just way too many pitching options to even think about going there. I wouldn't prioritize Oakland bats. They're going to be priced up, and Leake has shown decent enough recent form. I know Chris Davis is heating up. Great one-off play though. When Chris Davis is hot, that dude will hit 2 home runs against anybody any day. So big fan of Chris Davis as a one-off. Next up, again, we're getting to the end here, is Kyle Gibson. Kyle Gibson is 8,300. I thought it was 82, but I had that wrong. He has looked really, really good lately, and he was pitcher of the month last month, I believe, or the pitcher of the week. I don't even know. He got some award recently for being really good. And he's looked at, if you look, his K9 is over 13.1. He's walked more people than I would like, but his whip is still only 1.09. The ERA 2.45, he's getting lucky. We can see the FIP of 3.66, but he's not only getting lucky because the XFIP is 2.47. So I think that Gibson is certainly in that Woodruff Weaver tier of someone in the 8,000 range who has 30-point upside if everything goes right. I wouldn't count on him as much as a Smith or a Morton, but if I'm starting to look at GPP plays or I need to save a little bit of money, those are 3 guys that I absolutely have no problem playing and would say I close to love tonight. The one issue is, of course, Mike Trout. You can always play him. Kyle Gibson, I believe, is a reverse splits pitcher, if I remember correctly, and Mike Trout is a reverse splits hitter. He shows, he's slightly reverse. But when you see that, I've talked about it, it's an additive effect. A reverse splits righty going against a reverse splits righty is really good for the hitter. So you always want to try to look out for something like that. Kyle Gibson, slight reverse splits. Mike Trout, reverse splits. Mike Trout is always a good one-off, but he's in a better spot today than normal. Other than that, I think that this is, I'm not worried about most of the rest of this lineup, especially if Cozart's batting. There's a reason he was 2,200 yesterday, and it's not because they made a pricing error. It's because he's been terrible. All right, next and last is someone that I am not going to play, but I think it's worth mentioning. Shelby Miller for the Rangers. If you look at the way he is pitched in terms of luck, he has been very, very unlucky. 2 starts against Pittsburgh. He should have done much, much better than he would have. if he didn't have such a terrible team behind him. But unfortunately, he will continue to have a terrible team behind him. So you look and you see the 11 strikeouts per nine. That's really good. Not bad at all. He walks way more people, almost 4 walks per nine. The whip 1.5 is terrible. And then you see the ERA of 7.36, and you go, holy shit. That's ridiculous. But the FIP is 3.66 and the XFIP is 4.16. And this is part of what I was talking about yesterday, is the snobs who say that ERA doesn't matter at all, when the reason his ERA is so high is because of the bad team behind him. And it's not like the team behind him got any better, or part of the reason. If you have bad defenders in the outfield, with bad zone ratings, ditto for your infielders, they're not going to get to harder hit balls or to as many balls as like a Kiermaier or, some of the Platinum Glove winners. There are plenty of pitchers who are going to be underrated and who are going to be able to win you a game regardless of the people behind them. And Shelby Miller is not one of them. So while he does pitch better than the numbers indicate, he should not put up the numbers that indicate that, because the Rangers are a bad team behind him. And people often ignore that when they dig into advanced stats. They like to pretend that everyone pitches in this like utopia or this bubble where the ancillary factors don't matter to what happens in a game. The XFIP and the WOBA are all that really matters, but that's unfortunately not how it works. If that was how it worked, then everyone who knew that would win every time, and it would be a completely predictive stat that people use to have better projections and beat Vegas, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What we see is it's a decent indicator of one thing or a group of things, but is in no way an indication of everything. Just like ERA isn't. I'm not saying ERA is great and we need to focus on it, but I am saying that everything tells its own story. And as long as you know what's important to look at and what isn't, you can understand what's going on. So that being said, those are the pitchers. There are a couple of other dudes that I think it's worth mentioning because of their strikeout upside. You have Flaherty with the Cardinals. He is overpriced for my liking. I'm 100% not paying $9,000 for him with the people around him, and the Braves do not strike out at all. So I think that, again, given the other people, you can go cheaper and get Weaver, Woodruff, Gibson, and do much better for yourself. Do not spend that $9,000 on Flaherty. It's just an extra risk that you don't need to take. So I also want to mention Kershaw has not looked great in his last couple starts, but I think that, again, part of that was San Diego too. I think that I like Kershaw a lot. I don't know if I'm going to favor him over Morton. I'm not going to favor him over Smith. It's really close with him and Syndergaard because of the matchup. Syndergaard does get hammered by the Nats, but that's saying that it ignores the fact that Bryce Harper was on the team and he mashes Syndergaard. But they do steal bases, and Syndergaard cannot hold people on. So that's an extra little bonus to the Nats. If you want to take like an Eaton one off, there's a chance that Eaton walks and then gets a stolen base at least once in this game. He can get you, the 14 from 2 walks and 2 stolen bases without getting you a home run, without even getting a hit, to be fair. Kershaw is 7-11 strikeouts per 9 over the last couple weeks. Not something I'm interested in. Not walking that many people, but his ERA is 4.97, backed up by the FIP of 5.09 and the XFIP of 4.06. Generally, I don't want to play pitchers with an XFIP over 4. Or a FIP over 4 when there's this many options. But that's ignoring that, ace pitchers have bad stretches. And Kershaw is someone who has as high an upside as anybody else. I will say that oh God, Miami's leading off with Berti. Oh my God, give me Charlie Morton. Yeah, I'm going to get into this in a few minutes. I want to look more at the offenses than the pitchers starting now. But again, I just wanted to mention that Kershaw has been in bad form, so I don't consider him like a cash lock or anything. But I do think he has a good chance of doing particularly well today. So let's look at the bats that I like the best. So first, I want to mention that the lineups for Tampa Bay and Miami came out, and Detroit as well. Oh, and Baltimore just now. Baltimore is a 6:00 game, though. So you can see Mancini, Nunez, Ricard. Rio Ruiz is not playing. I mentioned him before, so you can ignore his extreme reverse lefty splits. So Miami has John Beardy leading off. Brian Anderson, Walker, Castro, Cooper, Alfaro, Harold Ramirez, Miguel Rojas. That is, I know I say this a lot, but that is like the worst lineup I've ever seen. Neil Walker is the only player on that team who has an OPS like over 800 in the last like month. Or on the sea. I mean, the Marlins are one of the worst offense I've ever seen. This lineup is even worse than what I had expected them to have. Morton I might really have to play Morton and Caleb Smith together. If you look at the Rays lineup, Yandy Diaz leading off, Pham, Daniel Robertson, Aviciel Garcia, d'Arnaud is batting fifth, and then Kiermaier, a lefty who's not going to do well, William Dames, who's not that good a hitter, even though he has his good games, and Ji-Man Choi, who's batting eighth before Charlie Morton bats ninth. Yeah, give me Caleb Smith and the Rays 3.5 total all day. And then Detroit, I didn't get to that because I'm not a big fan of Wade Miley today, but I will get there when I look closer at the hitting. So Mets against Jeremy Hellickson. I'm not doing this in priority order. I'm doing it in chronological order. So this is a 7:05 game. Mets against Hellickson. Hellickson is one of the worst pitchers in the game, and he should not have a job. His ERA 4.82, his FIP is 5.47 with a 1.50 whip. He's walking a bunch of people. He's striking out some, and that's going to be okay against the Mets. But this is a good Mets team, and they get an upgrade whenever they get out of Citi Field. I've mentioned that before as well. Someone did a really fantastic study that showed that the Mets score fewer runs at home than on the road by like a factor of like 1 run less at home than on the road. And they're the only team that scores less at home than on the road, much less by like a whole run. There is something, and they're trying to figure out what, that is suppressing the offense in Citi Field, like an opposite Coors effect. So whenever the Mets get out of Citi Field, or whenever they're in Citi Field, boost to the pitchers. Whenever they're out of Citi Field, boost to the hitters. So absolutely love the Mets today. And there are enough cheap bats that I think you can get a couple of the expensive pitchers. McNeil, 4,500, a little expensive, but if you look at his recent form, he has been absolutely on fire. That dude has been hitting lights out lately. I will give you the exact numbers in a second. But he has been one of the better hitters in baseball. 429 batting average, 1.341 OPS, 357 ISO with a 551 WOBA. Conforto has a 561 WOBA. Nimmo has a 454 WOBA. Alonso 434 WOBA. Every single one of those people I mentioned also has an OPS over 1,000, with Cano with an OPS of 974 and a WOBA of 419. So this is a hot Mets team going against an absolutely terrible pitcher, and they are not priced nearly high enough. So you have J.D. Davis at 3,800, Cano 3,500, Conforto's 4,900, and Alonso's 5,200, which is adequate. Ramos at 3,500, Nimmo 3,500. You can get some of these Mets bats in a good spot. They're not going to score as many runs as some other teams, but the savings that you get is going to more than make up for it, especially again against Hellickson. Plus, I will point out that right now the wind is projected to blow across the field at 11 miles an hour. If that tilts up and starts blowing out to right field, that is going to be a significant boost to all of those lefty batters on both teams, and a downgrade to both Syndergaard and Hellickson. So that would be even better for McNeil, Cano, Conforto, and Nimmo. I would be a big fan of taking those bats there. Let's see. Next, again, love the pitching in the Rays Miami. I think that Boston is probably the second best overall offense on the slate today. Kyle Freeland away from home is better, but still a terrible pitcher. And I've talked about how the Red Sox are probably the second best team against lefties in baseball. So, Red Sox at home against Kyle Freeland is a fantastic matchup. Give me the top of that order. Michael Chavez has been fantastic lately. Nunez is a lefty masher, even though he's not nearly as good. He's 3,600, so you get the savings there. The one person I'd caution you on is Steve Pearce. Steve Pearce looks like he fell off the proverbial cliff that I've talked about, the pitchers falling off. He just has looked like he has no idea what he's doing. He's not someone that I'm going to take a chance on, even knowing his history and how well he does against lefties, even with the 3,200 price tag. I can understand if you're building a bunch of lineups with a bunch of Red Sox stacks, getting like a couple lineups with Pearce in there. I definitely would if I was doing like 150 lineups. But if you're doing a couple lineups, I think the risk far outweighs what you're going to get from him. So Red Sox, second best offense today, second best stack, I would say. Next up is the Astros and the Tigers. I like the bats in this game across the board. The Tigers are underrated against lefties. They're not good. I'm not going to say they're good. Believe me, they're not good. But for the price, and I've talked about this, they're still going to get a couple home runs a game. And, when everyone's like 4,000 and under, you could do a lot worse. So you have Goodrum at 3,400, who's been cold lately, but is still a decent leadoff guy. Brandon Dixon, who has been on fire lately, batting second for 3,800. I love that. Dual eligibility, first base and outfield. Absolutely love that. Castellanos, only 41. Miggy Cabrera, who's been hot lately, surprisingly, 3,200. Ronnie Rodriguez, who had 2 home runs in one game in that doubleheader the other day, 4,300, but he's second base and shortstop, which takes care of a couple of the tougher positions. Josh Harrison, back from the IL, looked great in his first game. He's only 3K. Beckham has been the best hitter on the Tigers over the last couple weeks. He's batting seventh at only 3,500. I think that even without taking a chance on like a Grainer or a Jones, you have enough cheap bats there with upside against Wade Miley, who's a good pitcher but not a fantastic pitcher, that I think it's worth taking a chance on them if you're trying to get the more expensive pitchers in. So again, the Tigers and the Mets are two of the cheaper stacks that I'm a big fan of. Tigers across the board. The Mets have bats that you have to pick from. The best offense, the best stack of the day is on the other side of this game, the Astros against the lefty Ryan Carpenter, who is the second worst pitcher on this slate. I don't know if you want to say, Beatty is at this point, but if he's not, Carpenter is. And on top of that, he's a lefty. And, while the Red Sox are the best, the second best team against lefties, I would say Houston is the best team against lefties. Granted, again, as I explained before, that is less so. Oh my God, I'm over an hour already. That is less so with Altuve out of the lineup. But, Eldemus Diaz showed you what he can do, even though he is an extreme reverse splits guy. Give me Springer, Bregman, Gurriel has looked great lately at 4,100. Excuse me again. Excuse me, I'm so sorry. Stomach problems. Diaz is under 4K, 39. Chirinos at 43 has been on fire lately. This Astros team is top to bottom on fire. If there's a way you can get a couple of those better pitching options in and a few of these Astros, do it. They are going to score more runs than anybody. I would almost bet on it. If you're hunting the win, you can take Wade Miley because he will probably win. But again, too many far superior pitching options. I think that the Cardinals are a nice sneaky team to take against Fulton Navich. He has just not looked great since he came back from the DL. He is overpriced at the 8,100. The Cardinals have looked great recently, like fantastic form. They've had a couple of really huge scoring games, and Fulton Navich just hasn't been striking people out. If you look at the advanced stats, Fulton Navich, 4.2 strikeouts per nine, 3.4 walks per nine for a 1.6 whip, a 7.24 FIP, and a 7.06 xFIP. Awful. I think that the Cardinals are like the Tigers and the Mets, or excuse me, like the Mets, someone that you can pull a couple of the expensive guys out. DeYoung is 5,000 and that's fine. Ozuna is 4,500 and that's fine. But Carpenter should never be, I know he hasn't looked great, 3,700. Molina's looked good, 3,800. Don't love Wong. His form has been terrible lately, but he's as much a home run threat as anybody when he gets hot, and he's 3,700. So, well, not anybody, obviously. You know what I mean. I mean that metaphorically. But this is a good Cardinals lineup, 1-8. And Fulton Navich has looked absolutely terrible lately. So I really do think that it is worth taking a chance on some of these Cardinals bats as one of the better stacks today. I don't like Flaherty, but I also don't want to stack against him. He's one of those guys. Looking at the Angels and the Twins, I've talked about Gibson. I've talked about the Angels pitching. So no thanks on the bats there unless you're taking a one-off that I talked about. I talked about Miller and Duffy. On the next game, next we have Pirates and Diamondbacks, and that's a fun one. I talked about Luke Weaver, but how about Joe Musgrove? Joe Musgrove, I don't know how to put this kindly, but dear God, over the last 14 days, 6.35 K for 9, not great. His walks per 9, 11.1. for a whip of 3.35 and an ERA of 20.65, xFIP 8.23. Diamondbacks, one of the best stacks of the day, especially at home. The only thing is they are priced higher than the Astros. So I would rather take the Astros than the Diamondbacks. I'd rather take the Red Sox than the Diamondbacks, but the Diamondbacks are right there as my third favorite. So I am a big fan. And the Cubs lineup has come out. Hayward, Bryant, Baez, Contreras, Schwarber, Boat, Descalso, Almora, nothing too crazy. Yeah, I would definitely, like I said, I would still rather take the Yankees bats and then the Orioles bats for the price, but the Cubs would be the second best stack. I just would rather take the pitching from that game if you're going to play it. Oh, and my wife is texting me. Please pardon me for 1 second, folks. So I do have to finish this up. She has to go to work. Okay, so San Francisco versus Toronto. Give me all the bats in this game. Thornton, a Giants team that doesn't strike out enough that I'm not going to trust Thornton. And Tyler Beede has a FIP of 10.27, walks for 9 of 10.3. Tyler Beede has looked terrible, and he's supposed to go after Nick Vincent. So give me the Blue Jays all day. Brett Anderson, also one of the worst pitchers on the slate. The Mariners are decent against lefties. I would say they're one of the better teams, but they are lefty heavy. So I'm absolutely a big fan of taking a few bats here, but they're not one of my favorite stacks. I think there's better options. And then San Diego, LA, Paddock and Kershaw, I've already talked about. So since there haven't been any questions, and since I'm over an hour, I will bid you best of luck. Thank you very much for watching. All my love to all of you, as always. Really, it always means the world to me that anybody watches this at all. I'm going to go try to lay down because the pain is getting terrible and I need to do what I have to do. All right. I love you all. Thank you so much. Have a beautiful day. Best of luck.